Coming up on Arirang News. The Inter-Korean military pact signed in 2018 that created buffer zones between the two Koreas has practically been scrapped amid North Korea's continued violation of the agreement, particularly firing artillery shells into the buffer zone in recent days. South Korea declares the accord no longer valid. A South Korea state-run think tank says, despite sluggish domestic spending, the country's economy is gradually recovering from a slowdown, mainly driven by stronger semiconductor exports. The 81st Golden Globe Awards takes place, celebrating the best in TV and film in the past year, with Beef's Steven Yeun and Alan Wong marking history as actors of Asian descent. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with the practical end to the Inter-Korea military pact signed in 2018. South Korea's military said there'll no longer be a buffer zone, which was brought in beyond the DMZ under the agreement. This follows North Korea firing artillery shells into waters off its west coast in recent days into a maritime buffer zone between the two Koreas. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has our top story.
On September 19, 2018, the two Koreas signed an inter-Korean military agreement that set up buffer zones for land, air, and sea to reduce tensions and prevent accidental clashes. But following the North's recent provocations, the South Korean military officially declared on Monday that these zones outlined in the agreement are no longer effective.
North Korea has breached the September 19 military agreement more than 3,000 times, and over the last 3 days, it has fired artillery shells in the West Sea. As a result, the zone where all hostile activities are banned no longer exists.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff also said the military will not respond to every provocation initiated by North Korea, and instead conduct firing exercises according to its own schedule. The maritime buffer zone in the West Sea extends 135 kilometers. That's 85 kilometers south of the NLL, or the Northern Limit Line that separates the two Koreas, and 50 kilometers north of the line. There is also a separate buffer zone in the East Sea that spans 80 kilometers. Provocative actions are prohibited in these zones, including firing artillery shells and coastal guns. The North had already said last November that it's withdrawing from the pact, and it has rebuilt guard posts inside the DMZ. With South Korea's announcement on Monday, the agreement is now practically scrapped. This comes after the South Korean military detected around 90 artillery shots by the North on Sunday afternoon. North Korea also fired over 200 shells on Friday and 60 on Saturday. However, in an attempt to shame the South Korean military's detection capabilities, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, claimed the North had not fired a single shell on Saturday, but instead detonated explosives simulating the sound of artillery fire. The South Korean military immediately dismissed the statement, calling it a, quote, comedy-like propaganda. In fact, according to military sources, the South Korean military detected the North blowing up explosives only 10 times before and after Saturday's shelling, which shows the North's claims are not true. An expert says the intention behind North Korea's latest provocation is to grab local and international headlines.
In a world distracted by Gaza and Ukraine, that North Korea is saying we're still here and we're starting the year with these types of artillery rounds. That garners a lot of international attention.
Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea's National Intelligence Service on Monday confirmed suspicions that Hamas is using North Korean weapons in its war with Israel. This follows the Voice of America report last Friday about the use by Hamas of a North Korea-manufactured F-7 rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The report included a photo of the F-7 grenade launcher, which had Korean characters on it. The NIS concurred with the report and added it is gathering related evidence. Meanwhile, Pyongyang has denied these allegations, labeling them as groundless and accusing the U.S. of false charges. Turning to the Middle East war, Israel says it has destroyed Hamas command in Northern Gaza. Tensions continue to rise in the region with reciprocal attacks between Israel and Hezbollah. Lee Seung-jae has more.
The Israeli military said Sunday that it has destroyed Hamas command in northern Gaza, adding that the army has killed at least 8,000 militants in the area. According to Israel Defense Forces spokesperson Daniel Hagari, Hamas is now operating in the area only sporadically and without commanders. He added that they are now focusing on dismantling the militant group in southern and central Gaza. Despite visits by diplomatic leaders from the U.S. and the EU, tensions in the Middle East continue to rise, with reciprocal attacks between Israel and Lebanon's pro-Iran armed faction Hezbollah. According to Reuters and CNN, Hezbollah announced that it fired 62 missiles at Mount Meron Air Base in northern Israel on Saturday, which it called a response to the assassination of senior Hamas leader in Beirut last week. The Israeli military said Sunday that it responded to the attacks by deploying fighter jets to bomb Hezbollah facilities in southern Lebanon. U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken and High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Joseph Borrell made trips to the Middle East as they tried to quell the tensions in the region. Meanwhile, the Qatari Prime Minister says the assassination of a high-ranking Hamas official, Saleh al-Aruri, in Beirut last week affected efforts to mediate a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. However, the Prime Minister vowed to continue mediation efforts. Hamas halted all ceasefire and hostage release negotiations with Israel after the death of its senior leader. A number of Hamas officials, including al-Aruri, were killed in a drone attack in Beirut. U.S. officials have pointed to Israel for conducting the attack. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
A South Korea state-run think tank says, despite sluggish domestic spending, the country's economy is gradually recovering from a slowdown, mainly driven by stronger semiconductor exports. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korea's economy is showing signs of improvement. That's according to the Korea Development Institute in a report released by the economic think tank on Monday. The slowdown in the economy is easing as the semiconductor industry recovers. Industrial production in November surged by 5.3% on year, largely driven by the increase in chip production. Chip production saw a sharp rise of more than 42% from the previous year on increased demand for AI servers. A rise in chip demand also contributed to a rise in overall exports, which were up 7.7% in November compared to the previous year. Exports overall in December were up 5.1% compared to the year before, and while that gain wasn't quite as big as in November, the increase was larger when adjusted for the number of working days. Chip exports rose by some 21% on year last month. And car exports were up nearly 18%, mainly on the back of increased demand for eco-friendly cars. But the economy still faces headwinds as consumption and investment remain sluggish due to ongoing high interest rates. Retail sales continue to show an on-year decline in November of 0.3%, and while this was a smaller decline than the previous month, this was mostly due to the base effect and temporary auto sales. And equipment investment in November dropped even further from the previous month to around 12% on year. In terms of the global economy, the KDI stated that growth is gradually slowing as production and consumption remain sluggish amid high interest rates. Over in the United States, while there was a rise in both consumption and investment, it is expected that the U.S. will see a gradual slowdown due to reduced government spending and monetary tightening. In China, the real estate market continues to see a dip in home prices despite economic stimulus policies, raising the possibility of slower growth. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
On the local trade front, Korea raced past its target goal for overseas construction orders last year, bolstered by big contracts from the Middle East. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
South Korea's overseas plant orders last year surpassed the goal of $30 billion with a boom in orders from the Middle East. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced on Monday that the total came to $30.23 billion, up 25% compared to the year before. It's also the highest sum recorded since 2015, and it was a $1.5 billion contract to build a floating LNG vessel in Canada at the end of last year that tipped the total over the target for 2023. The ministry attributed the success to effective sales diplomacy in the Middle East, particularly the two summits between South Korea and Saudi Arabia held in November 2022 and October last year, which resulted in large-scale plant construction orders. The boom in the Middle East was reflected in the data. More than a third of all overseas plant orders last year were from the Middle East. The largest overseas order recorded last year was also from Riyadh, with Hyundai Engineering and Construction's $5 billion agreement to build a mega petrochemical plant for its state oil company. This is also the most expensive contract won by any South Korean company so far in Saudi Arabia. The United States came in a close second in terms of the percentage of overseas plant orders, as South Korean companies responded to the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act by localizing the production of electric vehicle parts. By country, the U.S. was also where South Korean firms secured the greatest sum of construction orders. It is the first time since data was first compiled in 1965 that the U.S. has been South Korea's top market for construction orders. An increase in exports of equipment such as semiconductors, batteries and display screens to the U.S. also contributed to the country's overseas orders meeting its target. This year, the government's goal for overseas plant orders is higher than last year's at $40 billion. For overseas construction orders, the country surpassed the $30 billion mark for the fourth year in a row, with $33.3 billion, just short of its $35 billion target. The government will be offering tailored support for companies during each stage of the contracting process to keep riding the Middle East boom. The country's Deputy Trade Secretary said that the ministry would do its best to strengthen export growth, especially with increasing demand in new industries such as decarbonization. 문혜련, Arirang News.
South Korean tech giant LG Electronics reached record high sales for the third consecutive year in 2023, despite intensified competition in the global market and sluggish demand recovery. According to LG's preliminary figures released on Monday, last year's sales were up 1% on year to around 84.2 trillion won, or $63.9 billion. The company said this was mainly attributed to its cash cow business of home appliances and new growth driver of vehicle components estimated to reach around 30 and 10 trillion won, respectively. Meanwhile, for the fourth quarter alone in 2023, LG saw a jump of around 6% on year in sales, exceeding its all-time high record from the year before. Shifting gears, the country takes a step towards launching its ambitious space agency. Related bills got a green light from a parliamentary committee today that sets the legal basis. Our National Assembly correspondent Lee Si-hoo explains.
South Korea is one step closer to launching a new space agency. The National Assembly's Science and ICT Committee on Monday passed bills to establish a new space agency that the Science Ministry has dubbed the Korea Aerospace Administration, or KASA. The bills passed are the Special Act for the establishment and operation of the agency and the revision to the existing Space Development Promotion Act. According to the bills, the new space agency will carry out policymaking, industry promotion, international cooperation, and more in the field of aerospace. It will start with fewer than 300 personnel but will grow its size through active recruitment. The agency will fall under the Ministry of Science and ICT and will also be monitored by the National Space Committee. The existing Korea Aerospace Research Institute and Korea Astronomy and Space Science Institute will now belong to the new agency, but the physical transfer of the institutions will require approval by the parliament. Both KARI and KASA will carry out research and development. The two main parties had conflicting views on this, with the ruling People Power Party insisting the space agency should carry out R&D projects that KARI is unable to, and the main opposition Democratic Party opposing this idea, saying it would create unnecessary overlap. The lawmakers eventually agreed to allow KARI to carry out its existing research and KASA to carry out other R&D projects. If the bills are approved at the plenary session on Tuesday, the space agency in Sacheon, Gyeongsangnam-do Province could start operations as early as May. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
The commercial Lunar Lander, Peregrine, developed by U.S. space robotics company Astro Robotic Technology, was launched from Cape Canaveral, Florida on Monday. If its mission succeeds, it'll be the first U.S. soft landing on the moon in 51 years after NASA's Apollo 17 in 1972. It's set to land on the moon on February 23rd and will be the first privately owned spacecraft to do so. Sponsored by NASA, the Lunar Lander was carried into space by Vulcan, a rocket jointly designed by Boeing and Lockheed Martin. On the cultural front, the annual U.S. Golden Globe Awards takes place in Los Angeles. For the event's highlights, here's our culture correspondent, Song Yu-jin.
Hollywood's star-studded award season has kicked off, starting with the Golden Globes. The 81st edition of the annual awards, which celebrates the best in TV and film, was held Sunday local time at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills, California. Netflix's comedy drama Beef made history. Steven Yeun and Ali Wong became the first actors of Asian descent to win in their categories. Yeun, a Korea-born American actor, clinched Best Performance by a Male Actor in a Limited Series, Anthology Series, or a Motion Picture made for television, while Wong won in the Female category. Yeun joked that there are some similarities between him and his character in Beef, while Wong spoke of her surprise.
I'm a respectful but skillful and at times aggressive driver. I live in LA, so I drive the same. Not that different from Danny. That's not illegal.
I mean, I think I was just really surprised. This is a really fancy event with a lot of fancy people.
Beef continued its triumph, winning a third Globe with Best Television Limited Series. Adding to the Globe's history was Lily Gladstone becoming the first Indigenous person to win Best Performance by a female actor in a motion picture drama.
So every time I've felt a level of guilt or feeling like it wasn't really possible, my mom and my dad, my whole life, they've never once questioned that this is what I was meant to do.
Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer was the top winner of the night. The 3-hour biography of physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer picked up 5 awards, including Best Motion Picture Drama and Best Director.
I think the tragedy and what drew me to the story is that certainly in the later part of his story, post-World War II, post-Trinity, he always maintained his loyalty to his country, what he needed to do, never apologized for what he did.
Greta Gerwig's Barbie clinched the inaugural cinematic and box office achievement along with Best Original Song. This new award recognizes films based on box office sales and digital streaming viewership. With the Golden Globes now over, up next is the 75th Emmy Awards on January 15th. Song Yu-jin, Arirang News.
Now on the tech front, researchers here have found a way to address wrinkles on screens of foldable phones. Our Chung Eun-ju tells us how.
Foldable smartphones can flexibly adjust to various sizes. While their overall performance has improved in recent years, the visible creases on the screen persist as a significant drawback. In response, South Korean researchers have developed touch panels that remain wrinkle-free even after repeated crumpling or folding. It consists of 3 layers, a shape memory polymer capable of adjusting flexibility from softness to firmness up to 700 times, combined with layers of silver nanowires and elastomer. The crumpled touch panel maintains rigid, but when a current is applied, the silver nanowires act as a heating element, softening the surface and making the wrinkles disappear. When heat was applied to a crumpled touch panel, the wrinkles vanished within a second. Touch performance was also maintained as the electrodes reconnected.
When the touch panel is crumpled, artificially applying heat softens the shape memory polymer, simultaneously eliminating the wrinkles.
The researchers developed the touch panel after being inspired by how a butterfly spreads its wings. The touch panel maintained its initial performance by over 95% and demonstrated durability in experiments involving folding and unfolding the panel more than 800 times.
After the butterfly's metamorphosis, its bodily fluids evaporate, gradually causing the wings to unfold. Our research team paid attention to this phenomenon.
The researchers are continuing further research to develop wrinkle-free displays by combining them with polymer-based luminescent components. The research results have been published in Nature Electronics, an international journal of electronic engineering. 정은주, Arirang News.
The cold snap that came with Sohan last weekend reached its peak today. However, this cold will loosen up as the temperatures rise tomorrow. Instead of the cold spell, heavy snow is expected. Snow will begin in the northwest, including Seoul tomorrow morning. This snow will gradually expand to other parts of the country in the afternoon. As for the amount of snow, up to 20 centimeters are expected in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province, up to 15 in the inland areas of Gyeonggi-do province, and up to 10 centimeters in Seoul. It's crucial to prepare and use public transport as there are concerns about the traffic chaos caused by icy roads on the way home from work rather than on the way to work tomorrow. With heavy snow expected tomorrow, most regions will start off at sub-zero temperatures. Seoul at -2, Daejeon and Daegu -4 degrees. For the daily highs, Seoul will get up to 2 degrees, Gyeongju and Busan 9 degrees Celsius. On Wednesday, snow and rain will gradually move away from the northwest areas. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is all for this newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 10 p.m. with the AI headline news. Hope everyone has a good start of the week.